The military spends billions of dollars every year training soldiers to survive combat. There are manuals for everything: how to handle explosives, how to fire weapons safely, how to stand near a tank without becoming part of the pavement. In theory, a modern army is one of the most organized, disciplined systems humans have ever built. And yet, occasionally someone still manages to lose a fight with their own equipment. Not enemy fire, not a heroic last stand, just a catastrophic misunderstanding of physics, explosives, or the basic concept of maybe don't do that. Because the battlefield is dangerous, but sometimes the most dangerous thing in the entire military is confidence. Today we're looking at 10 moments in military history where trained professionals made decisions so spectacularly bad that even the laws of war had to pause and say, "All right, that one's on you." These are not tales of bravery. These are case studies in weaponized stupidity. 10 soldiers, 10 terrible ideas, and 10 extremely fast lessons in how the universe handles bad decisions. Welcome to Mr. Playdumb. Let's begin with a courtroom demonstration that went aggressively off script. Part 1. The Courtroom Demonstration. In 1871, a lawyer named Clement Vallandigham was defending a man accused of murder. The case seemed simple. The prosecution believed the victim had been shot intentionally during a bar fight. Vallandigham, however, had a different theory. According to him, the victim had accidentally shot himself while pulling a pistol from his pocket. To prove this theory, Vallandigham decided to do something lawyers are generally advised not to do: a live demonstration. In front of several witnesses, he pulled out a pistol to recreate the moment. His goal was to show the jury exactly how someone might accidentally fire a weapon while drawing it. Now, a small but important detail. The pistol he picked up was supposed to be unloaded. Vallandigham had already practiced the demonstration earlier using an empty firearm. This time, however, the gun he grabbed was not the one he had practiced with, and it was very much loaded. Confident in his argument and apparently less confident in checking the weapon, Vallandigham placed the pistol near his own chest while reenacting the movement. Then he pulled the trigger. The gun fired instantly. The courtroom froze. The lawyer had just successfully demonstrated his theory. Unfortunately, he had also proven it using his own body. The shot was fatal. In a twist so absurd it almost feels fictional, Vallandigham's accidental self-demonstration actually helped his client. The jury accepted the argument that the victim in the original case might indeed have shot himself by accident. The defendant was acquitted, which means Clement Vallandigham technically won the case. He just didn't live long enough to celebrate the verdict. It remains one of the most bizarre legal demonstrations in history, a moment where a man tried to prove how an accidental shooting could happen and provided the most convincing example possible. Part 2. The Rocket Launcher Lesson. Rocket launchers are impressive pieces of military engineering. They are designed to destroy armored vehicles, fortified positions, and occasionally, buildings that would very much prefer to remain standing. But rocket launchers come with a small warning label. Actually, several. The most important one concerns something called backblast. When a rocket launcher fires, the rocket goes forward, but an enormous burst of superheated gas explodes out of the back of the launcher at the same time. This blast can travel dozens of feet and is powerful enough to injure or kill anyone standing behind it. This is why every military training manual includes a very simple rule: never stand behind a rocket launcher. It sounds obvious. Apparently, it was not obvious enough. During a training exercise in the 1980s, a group of soldiers were preparing to demonstrate the use of an anti-tank rocket launcher. One soldier took position with the launcher on his shoulder, aiming at the target range ahead. Behind him stood another soldier who had apparently missed the portion of training where instructors explained the concept of explosive exhaust. He stepped directly into the backblast zone. The soldier holding the launcher fired. The rocket left the tube exactly as intended, streaking downrange toward the target. At the exact same moment, a violent wave of superheated gas blasted out of the rear of the launcher. Physics is extremely efficient. The force from the backblast hit the unfortunate soldier standing behind the weapon with the same enthusiasm normally reserved for enemy vehicles. Training manuals exist for a reason. Instructors emphasize safety zones for a reason, and the laws of thermodynamics absolutely do not care if someone was paying attention during the briefing. The entire event lasted less than a second, but it created one of the most painfully simple lessons in military history. Rocket launchers have two dangerous ends. One goes forward, and the other one is behind you. Part 3. Relax, it's not loaded. There are many famous last words in human history. Watch this. Trust me. And the undisputed champion of bad decisions involving firearms, relax, it's not loaded. Every military organization on Earth spends enormous amounts of time teaching one fundamental rule about weapons. Always treat every gun as if it is loaded. Not sometimes, not most of the time, always. Because guns have a remarkable ability to contain exactly one bullet that everyone in the room forgot about. During a training session in the early 20th century, a junior officer was giving a demonstration on firearm safety to a group of recruits. Ironically, the entire lecture was about how accidents happen when soldiers become careless around weapons. He stood confidently in front of the group holding a service pistol. Instructors often perform demonstrations like this. They show how to inspect the chamber, how to check the magazine, and how to confirm that a weapon is safe. The officer had done this demonstration dozens of times before, so he skipped a few steps. After all, he knew the gun wasn't loaded. He turned to the recruits and began explaining the importance of discipline and calmness when handling firearms. To illustrate his point, he decided to show them how harmless an unloaded weapon could be. He raised the pistol, pointed it at his own body, and said the sentence that has ended countless safety briefings throughout history. Relax, it's not loaded. Then he pulled the trigger. The gun fired instantly. For a brief moment, the room fell silent in the most uncomfortable way imaginable, because everyone had just witnessed a demonstration that perfectly illustrated the exact lesson he had been trying to teach. The pistol had indeed been loaded. Somewhere between previous drills, inspections, or simple human error, a live round had remained in the chamber, which meant that when the officer pulled the trigger, the weapon did exactly what firearms have done reliably for hundreds of years. It fired. The recruits, who had been expecting a routine safety lecture, instead received the most unforgettable training session of their careers, not from the manual, from reality. Military instructors often say the most dangerous thing in a room full of weapons is not the gun itself. It's complacency. The officer had spent years handling firearms and had grown completely confident in his own experience. So confident that he skipped the one rule designed to prevent accidents. Always check the weapon. Always assume it's loaded. Always respect the machine designed specifically to launch pieces of metal at extremely high speed. Unfortunately, he remembered that lesson about half a second too late. And the recruits in that room never forgot it. Because sometimes, the most effective safety training comes from watching someone prove exactly why the rule exists in the first place. Just not usually in such a dramatic way. Part 4. The tank that doesn't stop. Military vehicles are impressive machines. They are built to survive explosions, cross rivers, crush obstacles, and carry enough armor to stop bullets that would turn normal vehicles into scrap metal. In other words, they are not designed with one specific feature in mind: stopping quickly. A modern tank can weigh anywhere between 50 and 70 tons. That's roughly the same weight as a fully loaded semi-truck, except with thicker armor and a much worse sense of humor about physics. During a training exercise several decades ago, a group of soldiers were observing a demonstration of armored vehicle movement. The exercise was simple. The tank would drive forward across rough terrain, while the instructor explained how crews coordinate movement and communication. One soldier in the group, however, had developed a very confident theory. He believed that a tank driver would obviously stop if someone stood directly in front of the vehicle. After all, soldiers are trained professionals. Surely the driver would see him. Surely the tank would stop. Surely everything would be fine. Now, a quick reality check. Tank drivers sit deep inside armored hulls with limited visibility. Most of what they see comes through small viewing ports that give a very narrow picture of the outside world. If something small appears directly in front of a tank, especially close to the ground, the driver often cannot see it at all. But confidence is a powerful force. At some point during the demonstration, the soldier stepped forward and positioned himself directly in the path of the approaching tank. According to witnesses, he believed the vehicle would stop once the driver noticed him. This belief was based on two assumptions. First, that the driver could see him. Second, that a 60-ton armored vehicle moving forward across uneven terrain can simply halt on command. Neither assumption was correct. The tank continued rolling forward. From the driver's perspective inside the vehicle, everything appeared normal. The terrain was clear, the path ahead looked open, and the demonstration continued exactly as planned. From the outside, however, the situation had turned into a very short lesson about momentum. Heavy vehicles have something called stopping distance. The heavier the vehicle, the longer that distance becomes. Tanks do not glide gracefully to a halt like bicycles. They require space. And unfortunately, the soldier standing in front of the vehicle had provided exactly zero space. By the time the crew realized what had happened, physics had already finished the conversation. The tank eventually stopped, just not soon enough to make the theory correct. It remains one of the simplest misunderstandings in military history. The idea that standing in front of several dozen tons of moving armor is a reliable communication method. Because tanks, unlike pedestrians, operate under one very strict rule. Momentum does not negotiate. And when 60 tons of steel are moving forward, the universe tends to side with the steel. Part 4. The tank that doesn't stop. Military vehicles are impressive machines. They are built to survive explosions, cross rivers, crush obstacles, and carry enough armor to stop bullets that would turn normal vehicles into scrap metal. In other words, they are not designed with one specific feature in mind: stopping quickly. A modern tank can weigh anywhere between 50 and 70 tons. That's roughly the same weight as a fully loaded semi-truck, except with thicker armor and a much worse sense of humor about physics. During a training exercise several decades ago, a group of soldiers were observing a demonstration of armored vehicle movement. The exercise was simple. The tank would drive forward across rough terrain while the instructor explained how crews coordinate movement and communication. One soldier in the group, however, had developed a very confident theory. He believed that a tank driver would obviously stop if someone stood directly in front of the vehicle. After all, soldiers are trained professionals. Surely the driver would see him. Surely the tank would stop. Surely everything would be fine. Now, a quick reality check. Tank drivers sit deep inside armored hulls with limited visibility. Most of what they see comes through small viewing ports that give a very narrow picture of the outside world. If something small appears directly in front of a tank, especially close to the ground, the driver often cannot see it at all. But confidence is a powerful force. At some point during the demonstration, the soldier stepped forward and positioned himself directly in the path of the approaching tank. According to witnesses, he believed the vehicle would stop once the driver noticed him. This belief was based on two assumptions. First, that the driver could see him. Second, that a 60-ton armored vehicle moving forward across uneven terrain can simply halt on command. Neither assumption was correct. The tank continued rolling forward. From the driver's perspective inside the vehicle, everything appeared normal. The terrain was clear, the path ahead looked open, and the demonstration continued exactly as planned. From the outside, however, the situation had turned into a very short lesson about momentum. Heavy vehicles have something called stopping distance. The heavier the vehicle, the longer that distance becomes. Tanks do not glide gracefully to a halt like bicycles. They require space. And unfortunately, the soldier standing in front of the vehicle had provided exactly zero space. By the time the crew realized what had happened, physics had already finished the conversation. The tank eventually stopped, just not soon enough to make the theory correct. It remains one of the simplest misunderstandings in military history. The idea that standing in front of several dozen tons of moving armor is a reliable communication method. Because tanks, unlike pedestrians, operate under one very strict rule. Momentum does not negotiate. And when 60 tons of steel are moving forward, the universe tends to side with the steel. Part 6. The Bayonet Confidence Test. Military training loves demonstrations. Instructors show recruits how equipment works, how weapons behave, and most importantly, how to use them without accidentally injuring themselves or everyone standing nearby. Unfortunately, demonstrations also have a long tradition of going catastrophically wrong. During one training session in the early 20th century, an instructor was explaining the use of the bayonet, the long blade that attaches to the end of a rifle. Historically, the bayonet exists for one very specific purpose: turning a rifle into a spear. It is not subtle, it is not decorative, and it is absolutely designed to be extremely dangerous. But the instructor had a point he wanted to make to the recruits. He believed that many soldiers were overly nervous when handling bayonets. According to him, the weapon was not nearly as dangerous as people thought, as long as it was used correctly and with confidence. Confidence, as we've already learned several times in this video, is often the most dangerous piece of equipment in the room. Standing in front of the recruits, the instructor attached a bayonet to the end of a rifle and began explaining how safe the weapon was when handled properly. To prove his point, he demonstrated how the blade could press against a person's body without causing harm. Now, this idea had one very large flaw. Bayonets are extremely sharp, and human bodies are extremely soft. But the instructor was convinced that if he applied the blade slowly and carefully, it would simply stop against the surface of the uniform. So he held the rifle upright, placed the tip of the bayonet against his chest, and leaned forward slightly. For a brief moment, everything appeared to support his argument. The recruits watched as the blade pressed gently against his uniform without immediately causing injury. The instructor smiled, clearly satisfied that he had successfully proven his point. Then he leaned forward just a little more, and the physics of sharp objects quietly entered the conversation. Fabric does not stop steel. Neither does overconfidence. The blade slipped through the uniform and into his chest with far less resistance than anyone expected. The demonstration ended instantly. Recruits who had been expecting a calm lecture about weapon safety instead received a lesson far more memorable than anything written in a manual. The bayonet, it turned out, was exactly as dangerous as everyone originally thought. Perhaps even slightly more. Military training emphasizes caution for a reason. Weapons are designed with a single purpose: to cause damage efficiently. Trying to prove otherwise with your own body is rarely an effective teaching method. But the recruits who witnessed that demonstration walked away with something extremely valuable: a permanent understanding of how sharp blades behave when pressed against human flesh, and the realization that sometimes the most convincing safety demonstration is the one nobody planned. Part 7. The Artillery Curiosity. If there is one universal rule on every battlefield, it is this: if you see a large, unexploded piece of military hardware lying on the ground, do not touch it. Artillery shells are designed with a very specific job description: travel long distances and then explode with tremendous force. The only reason an unexploded shell exists at all is because something in the detonation process failed. And when explosives fail once, they do not become harmless. They become unpredictable. Which is why unexploded ordnance is treated with extreme caution by every professional military on Earth. Bomb disposal units exist specifically to deal with these things. But curiosity is a powerful force. During the later stages of a 20th century conflict, a group of soldiers discovered an artillery shell that had failed to detonate during a previous bombardment. It was partially buried in the dirt, its metal casing blackened from impact. To most people, this would look like an obvious danger. To one soldier, it looked interesting. He walked over to inspect it. Now, soldiers encounter unexploded shells from time to time, and the correct response is simple: mark the location and call in specialists who know how to handle explosives without immediately becoming part of the explosion. Instead, the soldier decided to investigate personally. First, he nudged the shell with his boot. Nothing happened. Encouraged by the lack of immediate disaster, he picked up a nearby rock and tapped the shell lightly, curious to see if it was empty. Still nothing. At this point, the shell had given him two false signals. Silence. Unfortunately, silence from an unexploded artillery round does not mean safety. It usually means the detonator inside is unstable and waiting for the right amount of force to finish the job it was originally designed to do. The soldier tapped the shell again, a little harder this time. And the universe, which had been patiently observing the experiment, decided the test was complete. The shell detonated instantly. Artillery rounds are not subtle devices. Even a single shell contains enough explosive force to shred steel and send fragments flying hundreds of feet in every direction. The rest of the soldiers nearby had been watching the entire experiment with increasing concern. Unfortunately, concern travels much slower than shock waves. When the dust settled, the lesson was painfully clear. Explosives that failed once are not harmless. They are unfinished business. Military engineers spend years designing artillery shells to detonate under very specific conditions. Hitting them with a rock turns out to be one of those conditions. And curiosity, while useful for scientific discovery, is a terrible survival strategy when standing next to unexploded artillery. Part 8. The Grenade Prank. One thing military history has proven again and again is that soldiers can endure incredible hardship. Long marches, cold weather, sleep deprivation, combat. What the military has never quite figured out how to prevent is boredom. And boredom inside a group of young men surrounded by military explosives is a combination that has historically produced some extremely questionable entertainment. During a quiet period at a training camp in the mid-20th century, a group of soldiers were relaxing inside their barracks after a long day of drills. Nothing unusual, just tired soldiers sitting around, telling stories, joking, and doing the kind of low-level nonsense that happens when people have been awake too long. One of the soldiers had recently been issued a live fragmentation grenade during training exercises earlier that day. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with grenades, the design is actually very simple. Pull the pin, release the lever. You now have a few seconds to throw it very far away. If you fail to complete step 3, the grenade completes its job anyway. Which is why grenades are normally treated with a healthy level of respect. Unfortunately, respect is not a common feature in barracks humor. The soldier decided it would be funny to scare his friends. His plan was to pretend to throw a grenade into the room as a joke. The setup was classic. He stood outside the barracks door holding the grenade. The idea was to pull the pin, quickly open the door, shout something dramatic, toss the grenade inside, and then immediately grab it again before anyone panicked. In his mind, this was going to be hilarious. Everyone would jump. Then he would reveal the prank. The problem with pranks involving explosives is that they leave very little room for small mistakes. He pulled the pin, opened the door, and tossed the grenade. For about half a second, the prank worked perfectly. Several soldiers inside the room saw the grenade bounce across the floor and immediately reacted exactly the way soldiers are trained to react to grenades. They dove for cover, which left the prankster standing outside the door, realizing something very important. He had forgotten the final step of his plan. He had not grabbed the grenade back. Now, technically there was still time. Grenades usually give you several seconds between activation and detonation, but those seconds disappear extremely quickly when panic enters the equation. The soldier rushed into the room to retrieve the grenade. Unfortunately, the grenade had already begun the last stage of its life cycle, and grenades, much like deadlines and gravity, do not negotiate. The explosion was immediate. Barracks pranks are normally remembered as embarrassing stories told years later. This one was remembered for a very different reason. Military equipment is designed with ruthless efficiency. A grenade does not care if it was thrown in combat, during training, or during a joke that seemed funny 5 seconds earlier. Its entire existence revolves around doing one thing at exactly the wrong moment. And once the pin is pulled, the punchline arrives whether you're ready or not. Part 9. The Tank Shortcut. Tanks are one of the most powerful machines ever built by humans. They weigh dozens of tons, carry massive cannons, and are specifically designed to roll through obstacles that would stop almost anything else on Earth. Concrete walls, trees, cars. None of these things are serious problems for a tank. There is, however, one thing tanks are not designed for: being treated like a convenient shortcut. During a training exercise several decades ago, a group of soldiers were working around a parked armored vehicle in a staging area. The tank had been positioned temporarily while the crew prepared for the next phase of the exercise. Anyone who has ever seen a tank up close quickly notices two important details. First, it is extremely large. Second, it is extremely heavy. Which means, when it moves, everyone nearby normally stays very aware of where the tracks are. But on this particular day, one soldier noticed something. Walking around the tank would take about 20 seconds. Walking under it would take about 3. Now, technically, the space between the ground and parts of a tank's chassis can be high enough for a person to crouch and pass underneath, especially when the vehicle is parked on uneven ground. To most people, the idea of crawling underneath a 50-ton military vehicle would trigger a natural survival instinct. But to this soldier, it looked like a time-saving opportunity. He glanced at the tank, looked at the ground clearance, and made a quick calculation. What he did not account for was the other half of the situation. Inside the tank, the crew had just finished their preparation and were about to reposition the vehicle. From the crew's perspective, everything outside looked normal. No one appeared to be